Here we are, folks. Welcome back to episode 3 of Unearned Confidence. My name's Ben, and I'm here with Kyle.
Hello.
Today, we are talking about the Third Row Tesla podcast with Elon Musk, Big Auto and why they suck a bag of dicks, Toyota hybrids and why they don't make sense, and neuro pathways.
So tell me about this beard. It's looking good.
I
didn't know you could grow a beard.
Well, yeah, I don't know that you'd call this growing a beard, or it's just sadness. But for like a decade and a half of my life, maybe even longer, I was an airline pilot, and we couldn't, we had to shave.
Oh,
there was some airlines that had a little flexibility on that. JetBlue did, but most of the others were like, no, you got to shave. And it's just all kind of the way they wanted you to look and whatnot. Maybe there's some practical reasons, but my wife is really getting into beards these days. Yeah. Not her own, but she's getting into beards, and she's like, you should grow that out. I'm like, okay. and I thought about it the first time, and I didn't quite pay attention. She's asked me again. I'm like, I know she's into a lot of these CrossFit guys, and
they're all grizzly retired veterans.
Exactly, and they've got like these beards and everything. So I'm like, all right, this is one weekend, which you probably can't even see on the camera, but yeah, it's coming in real nice and gray and white, and then they're like sprinkled with the pepper or whatever. But yeah,
I like it. I think it looks good. Keep growing it. I support it.
She's asked me to go another week, and it's strangely, for me, it's so such a visceral feel, like a tactile thing, like
itches.
It itched initially. Now I'm kind of getting a little more used to that. But I'll tell you, it's like having a like a sober October. Like it's you really have to put one foot in front of the other to stick with it.
Yeah.
And at least that's my experience right now. So. Anyway.
Congratulations. Welcome.
Yeah.
Even though my beard sucks.
No, it doesn't. No,
does.
You got one of those. It's super cool.
Everyone makes fun of me. It's fine.
I can't because I like it and I'm jealous. I got beard envy. What's new with you, man?
Same old.
Yeah.
Getting through life. Did you see that Third Row Tesla podcast?
Yeah, I finally did. That was recorded the first week of I think the first week of February or something like that. February 9th, I think, is when it was. So
yeah, and it came out in installments, and then they finally stitched it all together. It was weird.
Oh, is that why it said director's cut or something like that?
Yeah, I don't know.
Oh, whatever.
Why that happened, but
yeah,
it was good.
You mentioned it, and I finally watched and of course listened to. What'd you think of it?
I loved it. I was like, I couldn't even pay attention to work while I had it on. I had to turn it off and wait till I was done with work to watch it.
Yeah. It's like 3 hours long, right?
Or more. Yeah. But I just love the way those people think. I think they're all kind of following in Elon's footsteps.
Totally.
I love just the pragmatism and rationality. And
no doubt. I was... So he mentioned, so I guess he's just buying up all the houses around where he lives or whatever. And that the house where they recorded in is like his 5th spare house. And it's like Gene Wilder. I don't know if you're old enough to know Gene Wilder.
Willy Wonka, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Frankenstein and all that. Awesome. Just incredible, funny ass dude.
Right.
Anyway, this is his old house. And it's like I don't even know the square footage on it, but it's a very modest-ish.
I looked it.
Yeah, like what do you call them? Ranch house, but it's in Bel Air, so it's. I think he bought it for like $6 or $7 million or whatever. But I was just like, okay, and I this doesn't matter at all. This doesn't color my view of Elon or anything like that, or the folks from Third Row Tesla. But it's like. He's got a badass 20,000 square foot home that's just like tricked to all hell. What was the decision process to go into Gene Wilder's old house? I mean, was it just a conversation piece, or is this, is that is his main residence kind of like, off limits? Do you?
I mean, maybe I'm being too generous, but I get the impression that he has pretty like his sensibilities are relatable. I get that
Totally.
impression.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't put it past him to just be into it and think it's like cool.
Right.
But it could also just be a very deliberate, like wanting to be perceived that way kind of move. So
well, he definitely mentioned he was a fan, like a legit fan of Gene Wilder, not just like,
right.
Oh, I bought his house, I should figure out who he is. But like a lot of us, he's totally into his work and all that.
He doesn't seem that impressed by the fact that he's mega rich. That's the impression I get. He just kind of seems like worried about what he's worried about.
Yeah, and I think that plays out in his effectiveness. Like I kind of mentioned this before, that I don't think he measures the success of his life with zeros. I really don't. I mean, I'm not such a fanboy where I'm like, he doesn't give a shit about money at all. Clearly, he's bought 4 or 5 homes right there in Bel Air, and he probably has a jet and everything else. But
I think it's just part of the necessary. It's a necessary part of the equation, you know.
I feel like I need 5 homes, so yeah. But no, I get your point. I'm joking. Yeah,
touche.
He did. No, I'm not even knocking that. I mean, again, I look at the value of what he's bringing to planet Earth, and I probably just whatever you want to do, man. But he covered an enormous amount of territory, or like I feel like they covered a lot of territory in that third row because it was over 3 hours, right? Like,
yeah.
They what was anything that like stuck out to you that was like the most profound thing? Or
yeah, actually, when they were talking about Zip2.
What his like startup company, his first startup or whatever.
Yeah,
that he did with Kimball Musk.
Exactly. Yeah, he it's just like, I guess maybe it stuck out to me because he was talking about being at a point in his life that I feel like I either was in my recent past, or even am in to some extent now.
Yeah.
And so obviously it's his version of it, so it's far more grandiose and incredible than my version of it. But I loved hearing him talk about the vector-based mapping, in particular when his brother was talking about it, and how just kind of knowing a little bit about how images work from my work, going from a raster-based map, which is just an image file, to like coordinate data. Yeah. And then the phone, or not the phone, at that point it was the computer, would actually do the processing and build the map locally from that data. When they were talking about all that, that seemed kind of like incredible technology as they were talking about it, even though I am aware of its existence. Yeah. Imagine it back then.
Oh my God.
Like the first time they saw that load, everyone, I feel like that was probably like, what kind of wizardry?
No shit. Well, did you hear the bit about them going to basically Yellow Pages? And this is what just, I laughed my ass off, and I think probably everybody else there did too, but like when they went to Yellow Pages, and they were like, yeah, you guys basically get lost. Yellow Pages will be around forever.
I know it.
That blew me away. That the hubris of the people that own or ran the Yellow Pages or similar type publications felt that were immovable, and of course they moved them.
It's satisfying when reality works like you think it ought to.
Well, and I think that's what gives me a degree of hope about the human species, is that on any given day, any of us are susceptible to being sucked into the vortex of politics and every other thing that is to where we're fighting fights that are just going nowhere and everything else like that. And it's very refreshing to see people that they see their only purpose in the world is to solve real problems. Mm-hmm. And they just dedicate, they don't get distracted like I might. Oh, who said this and did this or whatever, and what's your point of view? Well, I'm going to counter that. They just work, and then if you're in the way, they go around you.
Right. Yeah.
And I love that idea.
I do too.
I don't know if it's generational or what. Elon's basically the same age as me by like within 20 days. So I don't know if it's a Gen X thing or maybe a millennial thing, but I'm very heartened by the idea that there are people that just get shit done, and they don't mess with all the stuff that seems to occupy all of us mere mortals' brains.
Yeah.
You
Yeah, it inspires me. Like, I think that I try to apply it, and I probably only do it like a fraction of a percent compared to what they're doing it. But at least it's happening, at least, across. I think he's inspiring other people, too, to think the same way.
Yeah.
All those podcasters that were sitting around the table seem to kind of be on that same wavelength with him as they're talking through things. They kind of understand
totally
the lens he's looking through.
Well, I think that's that's a good way of putting it. Like I feel like personally, I am personally was somewhat demoralized, over the last couple of years, and the way we've kind of shifted what it means to be American and things like that. And now seeing this person who sort of knew early on that he was going to go solve big problems, and he's just doing it. It's extremely motivational.
Yeah.
And I think that's why there are, people call them fanboys or whatever. And those certainly do exist. But there are people I'd much rather say inspired. And I fall in that camp for sure.
Yeah. And I think that especially when you have a business and it's time to make a decision, it's actually not that hard to reason through the decision.
Yeah.
And come to a logical conclusion on what the right thing to do is.
Right.
But in my experience, and what happens is you either don't have the grit to really execute it to all the way through, or you start to get distracted by something else. You get worried. What if I'm wrong? You start kind of trying to hedge your bets by doing other things at the same time. And if you just follow the logic, come to the conclusion, and stick to it, and don't let yourself get distracted. It's so simple, but if you do that, like, you can move mountains.
Totally. Well, that's definitely what has occurred with him, and it's very one of the things that I feel like I'm picking up on him is that while the naysayers will call him sort of full of shit, I feel like he's like binary. I think he's not full of shit at all. I think sometimes he has to be a showman, and that's where some of the like timelines in the past and things like that have gotten in the way. But generally speaking, he just breaks down all of his conquest into binary code, and says, here's what we've got to do. Let's put together the solution and make it happen. And then they make it happen.
Right.
I mean, they have to iterate for sure. He talked about the failures of various things they did early on, even starting back with the Roadster. If you recall that conversation when they were talking about the Roadster and his discovery that designing a vehicle is pretty much the easy part.
Yeah.
Like relative, of course, but bringing it to mass scale production is a motherfucker.
Right.
And he got this is what I appreciated about him, is that, a lot of, like Fortune 500 companies are just big established companies. They're like so secretive about everything, and they hold it to their chest, and they're like, no, don't show any weaknesses. That'll cause us to get pummeled or something. And he's like, man, putting together the assembly line for the Model 3 basically nearly killed us. We were like a mouse hair away from death.
Right.
And that's pretty badass. I mean, that he can be so forthright and honest about where they were. I think that's what allows him to do great things, honestly.
Yeah. I know. Did you were saying that he's kind of a showman, and sorry to keep harping. I mean, I feel like people that have listened to all three of our episodes are probably like, more Elon Musk. Yeah. Jesus, the man has enough to do. It's going to be hard to get it all done with two grown men on his dick. But
right.
But Lex Friedman was talking about that he thinks.
Who's Lex Friedman?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So Lex Friedman runs the Artificial Intelligence podcast, and it's fucking excellent.
And he does this from MIT, right? He's also a professor at MIT.
Yeah, although my understanding is that he's starting to move away from MIT, and he still has some sort of an affiliation with them, but I don't think he's a full-time professor anymore.
Right on.
Anyway, yeah, very good podcast. But he was discussing Elon Musk with, I think, Jim Keller or someone, and saying that he sees him as this guy that's sort of in a quantum state where he's this super honest, hardworking do-gooder, and also just like the biggest troll on the planet. And I was like, that one, when he said that, it kind of rang my bell. I was thinking about it. Like, I didn't completely disagree, but I didn't completely agree. And it almost sort of like speaks to what he's saying.
Yeah.
But yeah, because Elon Musk strikes me as hyper honest.
Yeah.
But it's almost like he uses honesty to fuck with people. Do you get that impression?
Well, yes, I do. I don't know if it's fucking with people or what. I don't disagree with that. But what the net result is, do you know how much Tesla spends on advertising?
Zero, basically zero. I mean, they do a little bit of video production, but they don't actually push it out.
Yeah, exactly. In terms of the purest sense of advertising, it's buying space, right? To put your product out there. They spend time and money on marketing, but in terms of pure advertising, where most of the major players spend literally billions of dollars, and that's baked into the cost of the car that you're buying.
Yeah,
they don't do it.
Right.
They across the board don't do it, and I think he's first off, he's got a fleet of people out there that Tesla or YouTubers that just talk about their cars, and these people have millions of followers, and they just go out there and the next whatever update comes up, they just talk about it, and it's like gold.
Yeah,
and it's not limited to that. It's of course it's deeper than that, but I think his trolling, if you want to call it that, is really, it's just they say there's no bad press, right?
Right.
And I think that's legitimately true. They can't. Even though there are things that are negative said about them, or they say and make mistakes or whatever in that regard, I don't think it's hurt them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just had an interview with Robert Greene. He was saying that he thinks all of that, the tweeting and everything, is his ego, and that it'll be what ends him. I was like,
I don't know. I
like Robert Greene. I can't believe you said that.
Yeah, well, there may be some truth to that, but I'll be honest. I think that Elon at the helm of these various companies is pretty magical, and I think that the negativity, while it's caused some consternation, he had to pay a fine or whatever, I think the net result of his out there and being upfront is people get to know that the short sellers can say one thing about him, but in reality, because we have so much of him in front of us, we get to see that he's a pretty decent person, and he's incredibly intelligent, and he's focused on, sort of his manifesto of making us an interplanetary species.
Right.
But we can get off his jock for a minute. I want to talk about, if you're cool with this, I want to talk about why I'm pissed at, we'll call it Big Auto.
Okay.
And I've alluded to this before, but that there are tons of naysayers out there against Tesla. Most of them have never driven one. Once they drive one, even Kramer from what's the money show on MSNBC or whatever?
Oh yeah, Mad Money.
Jim Kramer finally came around a few weeks ago, and the genesis is his wife or somebody got him to buy a Tesla, and then he became a believer in the vehicle, and then he started paying more attention, and he's like, holy shit. He's the one I think he's the first to say big oil is tobacco.
Yeah.
But the thing with Big Auto, as we say this, is there's some fundamental differences. It's not just the fact that Elon is the first to make like a mass-produced all-electric vehicle designed ground up. That's obvious. What's not obvious to those of us who, or many of us who are looking at the other players who make internal combustion engines or gasoline engines, what's not obvious to us is how do they operate, and why have there been so few players over the last 100 years, and what sort of things bring them money. And what's astonishing, at least if you listen to like the guys from Now You Know, or even Elon himself and others, is they don't really make their money, at least their big money, off the sale of the vehicles. Did you know that?
No.
Like their margins are pretty tight, but they make their money on service.
Oh.
Every time, like a regular gasoline engine has to be serviced routinely, and all of the transmissions and drivetrain and the axles and everything needs to be maintained.
I thought you were going to say something like they make money on interest for financing the cars or something.
Well, that's true too.
Yeah.
Like that whole, if you remember down from Austin, they talked about the finance side of things and how that is a major thing. So one of the reasons why all of the auto manufacturers, or many of them, have been so anti-Tesla and helping to push this anti-electric agenda is the cars really don't need much service.
Yeah.
When I picked up my wife's Tesla, when she and I picked it up, I asked the guy that was there just sort of demoing the vehicle to us and, filling out the paperwork or whatever. I'm like, okay, so when do I come back in for service? And you know what he said? He's like, it's like 3 years. And then, or 2 years, 2 or 3, whatever it is. But it was like to get a cabin air filter.
Yeah.
Period. Now, obviously, I got to change tires, but that's standard across any vehicle fleet. You're going to wear them out.
Yeah.
Although I suspect they're probably making a tire that won't wear out for like 1 million miles or whatever, because Tesla makes it all. But so that's they don't require any real maintenance unless you crash them, and that's the same as any other vehicle, right? So the dealer network is unnecessary. The service and maintenance of them is unnecessary, at least, but it's a massive profit center to the dealers as well as the manufacturers. And so what Tesla represents, and why all this, the dealers are trying to fight them coming into states and doing all this, is just because it costs less to own it, like by a lot. You don't pay for gas, pay nominal amount for electricity. You don't pay for service.
Right.
And it's not down. My wife puts a lot of miles on a car.
So how do they then keep a solvent business if that source of revenue is gone?
That's the $1 million question, right? So this is what everybody once you come to the realization that everything is going to electric, you suddenly realize, and again, they must realize that, holy shit, the things that bring us all of our profit right now are poison, because they're going to first off.
But I mean, Tesla, how does Tesla stay solvent?
Because they bring things to scale. They bring things to scale. They meaning that they couldn't just continue building a handful of Roadsters or even a modest amount of Model X's or S's. These are expensive Teslas, and it's a very limited market. There's not a lot of margin. But
maybe they'll grow around. Sorry to interrupt. I'm
just
thinking out loud. Maybe those businesses grew around that revenue source being available to them, so they built out the infrastructure to support it.
You're talking about the entrenched or old auto manufacturers? Yeah, no worries.
So Big Auto evolved expecting that, so they built out the infrastructure to support it. Tesla is evolving without that.
Yeah.
So they're instead going to probably focus on, on real pie in the sky stuff, the robo-taxi network or whatever, but then also autonomous driving, software update that, the hardware's already there. They're selling you the software. It's no extra cost to them.
Well, on Third Row, if you recall, Elon said that for electric vehicles to really create a paradigm shift in auto transportation, they had to solve two problems: autonomous driving and electricity. Electricity is being the first, and then autonomous driving. Those are naturally built platforms together.
Right.
And that is it is already, but will be, once they're fully self-driving, a game changer that no one can really touch in any meaningful amount of time. So, but let me go back to this point about the entrenched players, whether it's VW, BMW, Mercedes, GM, Ford, any of them. They all turned their nose up at the idea of EV and said it's nothing. We don't pay attention to that. It doesn't really mean anything. Those of us who have had the fortune of being involved in it by purchasing or whatever and having them and owning them know that they're a game changer of a magnitude that I've never seen before. Like, they're magical vehicles in every way.
Remember Kodak?
Oh, yeah.
Remember BlackBerry?
Barely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, these businesses thought they had the market cornered, and then some innovation comes along and changes the technology that's being used by the consumer.
Yeah.
And they're extinct.
Exactly. You get protectionist. I mean, even it was talked about in the Third Row podcast. You get protectionist, and once you become protectionist of the little world you dominate, it's antithetical to innovation. It really is, and you can see it. And so when a player like Tesla comes in, who can, from the ground up, build a compelling electric vehicle that has range, that has speed, that has durability, all of it, 10x over anything else, it's very, very hard to do to overcome that. And if you look at the sales of where each of their class of vehicles, where they, are in the market, the sales of the competing vehicles, like, for instance, Model 3 actually covers quite a broad range of vehicles that it would compete against. But every single one that it competes against, it's destroying. BMWs and Mercedes and Volvos. And it's just, anybody that's searching in that market and they're considering EV, it's a done deal.
Yeah.
So they're not just competing with other EV players. They're competing with gasoline engines. But I want to drill home this fact that all of the major manufacturers of auto knew and know the superiority of electric vehicles. They knew, and they know now, that Tesla has opened a Pandora's box from which there is no return. And they're stumbling over themselves trying to figure out how do they preserve the big pipeline of cash, which is their current ICE vehicles, which stands for internal combustion engine. They're trying to preserve that cash, the revenue flow, but they have to go EV in order to compete, and that is it's not just you don't just take a car and take out its gas engine and put in an electric engine and a battery, and it's like good to go. That's all we needed to do.
Yeah,
they've got to figure out battery supplies, battery storage, the motors to do so, and a lot of these, in fact, probably all of the old manufacturers, what they're used to doing is, okay, well, we need this part over here. Go find out the guy that makes that part, and then go buy it from them. And go find this guy over here that makes that part, this entertainment system, this battery regulating system, this electric motor over here, and then they just sort of assemble it.
Right.
Well, Tesla pretty much makes it all. There's a handful of things they don't, but everything they do, and generally it's the things that matter. And now they're going to be, making their own batteries and all that sort of thing. Their margins will be so much better with a better performing vehicle.
Every time there's a transaction between businesses, there's a cost.
Exactly.
And I know on Third Row, Elon said, someone made a comment like, it's so smart of you to vertically integrate like you've done. And he goes, it was literally vertically integrate or die.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some of the little quips he had.
Oh, we're so great.
Yeah, like when they were talking to him about how, well, the stock price is doing so well now, and I'm sure that's going to really help fund R&D and blah, blah, blah. And he was saying, like, that's not how it works.
Yeah.
And
he literally said it like that. He did so matter-of-factly to the kid with the beard there. It's not how it works.
Yeah. Gally Russell, who is awesome and has great questions.
For sure.
So I'm not knocking him. He's smarter than I am, but that moment was badass. And he was when he leaned back and he's like, it's not like I'm looking around with my staff and going, what are we going to do with all these resources?
Yeah, that's exactly right. They're using them. Now again, I think it was brilliant that when the stock was up to nearly $950 a share, that they pulled a couple $1 billion out of the market.
Oh, that was sick.
So smart. And now that I'm guessing that'll probably fund Gigafactory 5 in Texas or wherever it's going to be.
Yeah, or just make sure they can ride out the storm if we do in fact enter a recession.
Yeah, I mean they have options now.
Yeah.
But it won't be spent willy-nilly. It'll be very strategic money spent to like you said, either survive or proliferate what they're doing and all that. So it was.
And if you didn't see the podcast, his response to that was that it's not like there's some factory somewhere that's just churning out excellent engineers. Where is this factory?
Exactly.
The issue is talent. It's not resources.
Absolutely. I think that applies to pretty much every business across the planet right now. That
Sure.
Anybody that wants to move the needle on, any grand idea, you have to have superior talent, the best talent.
Yeah, I often have a fantasy in my business that artificial intelligence will be able to be this infinitely scalable, talented thing that is under my control. But that's probably
somebody's got to build that.
I know.
Yeah. So the talented people are overdoing that right now. When they're done,
hopefully then it'll make my life easier.
Right on. Yeah. Funny. So, I want to go back to a couple of things that are interesting to me, and I'm not trying to beat up on big auto, but there's so many misconceptions in America. One, that Tesla's not an American company. It's an American company that builds their cars here in America. The one that I'm driving built all here. You can't say the same if I go buy even an American auto manufacturer.
Who says they're not American?
Oh, I hear it all the time. Like if you're on some, board looking around where people are like, that are anti-Tesla, they're like, they don't understand. Like maybe they just think California's foreign. I don't know, but it's a ridiculous thing that people think that the only American companies are the ones who've been around for 100 years, but it's actually the ones who've been around 100 years that have circled the wagons, making it hugely difficult to enter the market that I have the biggest problem with. And in fact, it was Henry Ford, at least according to the guys from Now You Know, that I don't know if he's the pioneer of planned obsolescence. For those of you who are not familiar with that, but it's the concept of planning for things to fail so that you can go and be the person or the entity that fixes and repairs and gets that revenue.
Yep.
And when he made the assembly line and all that, that's the general narrative we hear. But what really ended up happening was they used, cheap parts and learned how to be everywhere to fix these things on a regular interval, and that became the profit center. So
Henry Ford was involved in planned obsolescence, like the creation of that idea.
I don't think that they necessarily formed a conceptually themselves the idea, but they implemented it. I mean, that's what they did was
in effect.
In effect, exactly. So what's upsetting is that these really smart companies are making it look like they're ready to capture the problem. But the thing is that companies like BMW keep making these prototypes that are what we call vaporware. Like it's a prototype, it's an image, or it's a prototype, and it never comes to fruition. But it makes it look like they're doing something to address climate change or be an earth player and like making something good for us. But in fact, they're just building these mock-ups, and then they keep moving the goalposts. Well, we'll have it this year. V-Dub's another one. Even though they look like they're getting close, they still haven't produced one. Not one.
Right.
Fully electric vehicle. And it's just this game of, they thought they would be able to like crush Tesla and then they would go away, but they could still look good by having hybrids. And the only thing that, if you can build a hybrid, you can build an electric vehicle, or at least you have the potential to. Yeah. Not suggesting it's easy, but you have the potential to. And instead they make hybrids. And do you know why that is?
Is it like a tax credit thing or something?
Well, no. I mean, no, not for them certainly, but it might be offsetting their emissions, so that's a real thing. But in reality, a hybrid needs just as much service as a regular engine.
I misunderstood your question.
Yeah, well, I didn't phrase it very well, but the point is like Toyota in particular. Again, they made it look like they were really serious about hydrogen, but that's gone nowhere. They're not there's no practical hydrogen cars out there. There's no practical refilling stations for hydrogen. So it was. It looks like it was just platitudes. Like, yeah, we'll make it look like we're doing this thing, but all the while we're just.
You know what? Sorry to interrupt. I would love to get a super pro hydrogen dude on here. I just want to talk to him and understand it more.
Yeah, well, I do too, because
is there a contingency that supports hydrogen? Does that exist?
I think
or a constituency?
I don't know what the made-up word was, but that's all right. I do it too. I think that there are people that aren't really close to the industry that understand the science of using hydrogen as a form of energy for propulsion, of basically creating electricity.
Yeah.
There's certainly the people that understand that, and they can see that hydrogen's plentiful, and you can do the math and say, oh, yeah, that seems like a solution. But the reality of making it happen and practical on a grand scale is extremely challenging. It eventually gets solved someday if we need to go that route, but it's really, really challenging. But like what Toyota has done is they had this little side project of hydrogen that they got nowhere. I can't say matter-of-factly that was purposeful, but they didn't go anywhere with it. And wherein they could have just gone right into electricity because that's the obvious path, and instead they're just promoting these Priuses, the hybrids, and things like that. Which I've owned one, you own one. They're relative to a big F-150 that obviously doesn't serve the same purpose, but a lot of people drive those around as their daily drivers just to get to and from wherever. They represent a meaningful reduction in, I've said this before, meaningful reduction in their fuel consumption.
Yeah.
But when you amortize it out, first off, they suck to drive. They still require the same amount of maintenance, if not more, because now you have two powertrains or two different types of energy units inside them. And they did it to keep that whole service module going.
Yeah.
And that sucks.
But
and they
maintain the optics that we care about the planet.
Exactly. That's precisely it. So for those of you who are confused out there, know that the auto manufacturers all know that they're in on a big ruse. It's the truth. They're in on a big ruse. I don't want to see, like, if they all start producing EV cars in earnest, I would still get behind them, because I ultimately care about the solvency of the planet. But, man, I am of the ilk that's like, fuck you.
I would bet my left nut that they were aware of this with the EV1. Like, this conversation happened.
Why else would GM destroy all of those vehicles that people were starting to go, holy shit?
Yeah. Like, they held a candlelit vigil.
And then crushed them.
When they crushed them for a General Motors product. And Elon goes, have you thought about doing the EV too?
There's the troll.
Yeah.
I love it.
I know it. Yeah.
Well, so there are that's just touching on it. The other thing is that, a lot of the auto manufacturers, when I'm saying they kind of, outsource a lot of their stuff, one of the things that they have not necessarily outsourced in mass are their engines. The entrenched auto manufacturers are real proud of their gas engines or diesel engines and the things that they create, and they have made them on their own. And they've extracted efficiency and power out of as much as you can probably get in any meaningful way. They've extracted about as much good as you can get. And it's still nowhere near. It's not even on the same planet as electric engine, or motor rather. But why don't they change? And again, according to the folks at Now You Know, and just anecdotal stuff online, the big auto manufacturers have $200 to $300 billion with a B, dollars invested in those powertrains. And so the phrase, if you're a math guy, or a money guy, you'd say those are stranded assets.
Sure. Yeah.
That means when they go all EV, if they ever do or whatever, that shit's gone. Like it's gone. Stranded asset means you cannot recoup that value because you're scrapping it.
Right.
So yeah,
But you either got to swallow the pill and accept that reality and move forward,
yep,
or you're gonna fucking die.
right.
And that's the situation they're in. And I think it's clear what path they've chosen at this point.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I beat up on that. We've talked about Elon. We talked about big oil, big auto. I want to ask something, and I don't know if this is something you are keen on or know much about. I don't really know the science behind it, but I've talked in the past about growing up in rurally in Indiana and growing up around tractors and in farm country. I grew up from basically birth being in and around antique tractors, regular tractors, all sorts of machines, and have had a strong connection to them. As my identity growing up was all these just amazing mechanical devices that sounded cool. I loved the smell. I loved what they could do, what they represented, and I still do appreciate where they got us as a species, like where the internal combustion engine got us is really important to me.
Yeah.
But as I started to as the veil was lifted, as they say, and I started to see the harmful effects, and that there are solutions out there that are so far superior in nearly every way, my brain started to change.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's chemistry, the physiology, what's happening in my brain, but basically I could the fondness that I had, the obsession that I had as a gearhead for mechanical things and motors in particular, has been displaced by a fondness for electricity, electric propulsion, electric motors, and all that. What the fuck's going on in my brain? Like, do you have any clue there? Like,
did you have resistance initially when you started kind of thinking about this? Was it like, or when you were first exposed to maybe Tesla or electric vehicles in general, was there resistance?
Well, it wasn't Tesla, because Tesla came out with a fucking beautiful, sexy vehicle that I didn't even know was electric when I first saw them. This is probably 10 years ago, or not that far long ago, but like more than 5 years ago when I saw the first Model S, and I'm like, that's the most beautiful vehicle I've ever seen. But like, I want to go answer that question and go back. So I wasn't very old, but I was born in the 70s, so I was a kid when the oil crisis happened. And there were attempts by engineer types that had no design sense whatsoever to build something. They were just trying like everybody. They had, lead acid batteries that were heavy as fuck, and these little, ugly pin-headed turds. Like, think a Yugo, only uglier.
Yeah.
And so no, when I saw them, it was like, oh God, that's never gonna go anywhere.
Yeah.
And that was, again, one of the genius ideas of Elon, was to go. He understood the idea of creating a compelling electric vehicle.
Right.
Compelling means it's beautiful to look at, and it is. It's safe. It's fast as fuck. It has range. You don't pay for gas anymore. You charge at your house or at the supercharger network or whatever.
Yeah.
So I got enthusiastic after Tesla made it so.
Sure. Well, I think that a lot of people experience that, but then a lot of people also experience a continued resistance even after seeing that, the Tesla product. And it's probably because there's more to the story for them. They identify maybe with, the right-hand side of the aisle where there's just more entrenched personality resistance, right?
Yeah.
And so they're not going to look at it objectively. So like stuff like this, there's I'll try to make an argument here. I don't know how good of a job I'll do, but there's a study that's been repeated multiple times on patients that had an operation done called a corpus callosotomy.
Okay.
Corpus callosotomy. I can remember the word because it has sodomy in it.
All right.
So the corpus callosum is this connection between the left and the right hemisphere of the brain. And they sever that in people that have hardcore epilepsy, and it can control the seizures quite a bit. And people that have this, it's very rare, but they've been studied extensively, and there are these repeatable effects that you can expect, especially right after the surgery. And one of them is that, for example, like you can cover one eye, the eye that is taking the visual information and putting it to the side of the brain that does not process language is particularly interesting. So here's one experiment. They cover the eye that has a connection to the language center, and they allow the eye that does not have the connection to the language center to view a picture. And they show a picture of, say, a chicken. And then they take the picture off the screen, and they ask the person, what did you see? And the person says, I didn't see anything. And they go, okay. And they hold up 5 pictures, one of which is a chicken. They say, can you point to what picture you saw? And they point to the chicken. And they go, I thought you didn't see a chicken. And they go, well, I saw a chicken on my way over here, so I pointed to the chicken and they have a story. And this is super reliable. And I think it demonstrates, it's easy to kind of say, well, this is a person that had their brain cut in half. This is just a symptom of that. But I think that it's actually evidence of the fact that the human mind is this hall of mirrors. The neocortex is much more of a slave to the limbic system, which is your emotional center, than feels self-evident. And so we're coming from this default of bullshitting ourselves and trying to make an excuse for some intuition we're having, some emotion we're having, right?
Yeah.
So if you've built this identity that is,
Can you relate it to like the tractors of those motors that I'm talking about?
If you've built this identity that's super right wing, or some other version of an identity that's resistant to an electric vehicle, it's gonna create this resistance to actually accept the truth and look at the facts. Instead, you're going to make up a story for why it's bullshit. And you're protecting your ego in a way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
I think we all do that.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone's free of that.
Totally. Well, that makes sense. And maybe that is what's happening there. What I just know matter-of-factly is, again, I loved where and how I grew up in the country and being able to go out and do anything. And I was just, again, obsessed with all of the antique tractors that I was, the farmers near us had. And that, it was a source of great pleasure to even reflect upon that. And it informed me later in life, being obsessed with cars of all sorts, which, from everything from the posters you hang up on your wall when you're a kid of a Ferrari or whatever to, Mercedes, Audi, BMW, Porsche, and everything else just had a real, I could go on and on and on about them for days.
So I would guess that you approach your automatic impulses with a little bit of skepticism. Like you probably don't just assume you're right. If you
generally, yeah.
So that's a good thing.
Yeah.
And that's probably why you were able to adapt to a new worldview quickly.
Yeah, maybe. But I have to say, there are, if Elon had made a Tesla, like if the one I saw in Denver back many years ago was, a Me Too car in aesthetics, like some little piece of, not piece of shit, but like a non-compelling Corolla design from like 2006. Like I wouldn't have cared. So it was a process. The aesthetics of it didn't turn me off, so I leaned in.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And then as I started hearing people talking about them, and I still didn't even really appreciate, everybody kept saying they're so fast. Like, who cares? I don't drive around that fast anyway. I've got kids now, whatever. It wasn't until, and this is coming from a guy who flies jets, the acceleration out of a Tesla is the closest thing to a jet turbine acceleration that I've ever experienced in my life.
No shit.
It's relentless.
Yeah.
No, it just keeps going and going and going. So they captured me little by little. And that was before I knew anything about Elon, before I knew anything about Tesla at all, other than just the anecdotal, hearing people talk or whatever about about it, but it was the aesthetics. It started with the visual to me.
Yeah. Well, and I think another part of this conversation is personality profiles. And you probably have high openness to experience on the Big Five, and people who don't, like, aren't going to be open to new information. And
right on.
How do you get through to them? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, everybody has their portal, right?
Yeah, it's going to take time.
It's figuring out what those are. But, well, at this point, I think we've talked ourselves to death about Elon for the moment and Big Auto and even neural pathways. You want to wrap it up from here?
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, there we go.